She can't survive without me. She overheard her billionaire CEO husband's secret call with his mistress, planning to end their marriage until she proved them wrong. Mariah Hunt stood frozen outside her husband's office door, hand trembling. On the brass handle she'd polished 1,000 times without thinking. The December afternoon light cut through the penthouse windows like accusations. And through the crack in the door, she heard Sebastian's voice. Warm, confident, intimate in ways he hadn't spoken to her in months. I'm telling you, Allison, she'll never leave. She can't survive a week without my money. Trust me, I know my wife. A woman's laugh. Crystalline, educated, cruel. Then when are you actually going to end this charade, Sebastian? I'm tired of being your secret. You promised me that once the foundation papers were signed, you'd divorce her and we could be public. Soon, very soon. Friday, she signs the final documents for the Children's Hospital grant. $50 million her signature releases. The moment that ink dries, I'll tell her it's over. The prenup ensures she gets the bare minimum. A year from now, you and I will be at the Met Gala together, and she'll be a footnote nobody remembers. Mariah's breath stopped. Her vision tunneled. 7 years of marriage, condensed into a business transaction with an expiration date she hadn't known existed. What if she fights the divorce? Sebastian's mistress asked. She won't. Mariah's practical above all else. Once she realizes fighting means losing the lifestyle she's built her entire identity around, she'll take the settlement and disappear quietly. Women like her always do. They talk about pride until it costs them something real. Then pride becomes negotiable very quickly. The laugh again. You're terrible. I love it. So Friday's the day? Friday's the day. Just need her signature, then I'm free. Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to Mr. Heartline Stories, where every story touches your heart and inspires your soul. Whether you're new here or returning, you've found your home for tales that truly matter. Don't forget to subscribe to join our family. Turn on notifications. Like if you love heartfelt stories, comment and share your thoughts. Let's begin this beautiful journey together. Mariah stepped back from the door, her hand covering her mouth to trap the sound threatening to escape. A sob, a scream, something animal and wounded that would reveal she'd heard everything. Every calculated word, every casual cruelty, every assumption about who she was and what she'd tolerate. She moved silently down the hallway, her feet remembering the path through their home. His home, actually. She'd moved into his space 7 years ago and slowly dissolved into the architecture, until she was indistinguishable from the custom furniture and original art. Decorative, expensive, ultimately replaceable. In their bedroom, Mariah sat on the edge of the bed they'd shared, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. 34 years old, beautiful in ways magazines photographed, empty in ways she'd stopped acknowledging years ago. When had she disappeared? When had she traded Mariah, Castellano, MFA graduate with dreams of writing novels that mattered, for Mrs. Sebastian Hunt, whose biggest accomplishment was selecting the right caterer for charity events? The door opened. Sebastian walked in, already loosening his tie, phone pressed to his ear, finishing another call. He glanced at her without really seeing her, the way you look at furniture you've owned so long it's become invisible. He ended the call. Hey, something smells good. Are we doing that Thai place again for dinner? Mariah's voice came out steady, surprising her. Are you having an affair? Sebastian froze mid-motion, his hand still on his tie. His face cycled through expressions. Surprise, calculation, defiance, then something that looked almost like relief, as if he'd been waiting for this confrontation, maybe even hoping for it. Yes, the honesty was somehow worse than a lie would have been. A lie would have meant he cared enough to protect her from the truth. This casual admission meant he'd stopped caring about her pain entirely. How long? 6 months. Her name is Allison Rodriguez. She's a partner at the firm. It's serious. Mariah nodded slowly, absorbing information that rearranged her entire understanding of their life together. 6 months of lies. 6 months of him coming home to her bed after leaving someone else's. 6 months of her existing as placeholder while he built a future that didn't include her. I see. And you're planning to divorce me after I sign the foundation papers Friday. Sebastian's eyes widened slightly. You were listening. I overheard. You weren't exactly being quiet. He had the grace to look uncomfortable for approximately 3 seconds. before his expression hardened into something defensive and entitled. Look, I didn't plan for this to happen, but Allison understands the pressure I'm under in ways you can't. She lives in my world, speaks my language. We connect intellectually, professionally. It's different with her. Different than what? Than your wife who gave up her career to support yours? Than the woman who manages your entire personal life so you can focus on your empire? Different than me? You're twisting this into something uglier than it needs to be. Sebastian walked to the window, his back to her, speaking to her reflection instead of turning around. I don't want to lose you, Mariah, but I can't end things with Allison either. We're adults. Sophisticated people manage these arrangements all the time. Mariah stood, her legs somehow still supporting her despite feeling like they'd turned to water. Arrangements. Why does it have to be binary? You're my wife. That doesn't change. You're brilliant at managing our home, handling family obligations, representing us at social functions. Allison fulfills different needs. Intellectual partnership, professional understanding. Both relationships serve important purposes. Ending either one creates unnecessary loss. The audacity of it crystallized her shock into something sharp and focused. You genuinely believe I would accept this, that I would share you like you're some kind of timeshare property. I believe you're practical enough to recognize what walking away actually means. Sebastian turned to face her, his expression shifting into something meant to sound reasonable but landing as pure condescension. You haven't worked in 7 years, Mariah. Your MFA in fiction writing isn't exactly marketable in the real world. You'd be starting from nothing while I continue forward, barely disrupted. That's not pride talking. That's just mathematics. She'd abandoned her writing when they married, not because he'd explicitly demanded it, but through 1,000 small accommodations that added up to complete erasure. His schedule took priority. His needs required immediate attention. Her creative work got perpetually deferred until someday, and someday never came. 7 years of someday, and now he was weaponizing her sacrifice as evidence of her weakness. What if I choose to walk away regardless? Sebastian's smile carried poorly concealed pity, the kind you'd offer a child threatening to run away from home. You won't. Give it a few days to process emotionally. You'll realize comfort matters more than outdated notions of monogamy. Then we'll discuss terms that work for everyone once you're thinking clearly instead of reacting from hurt feelings. He checked his watch, dismissing her and the conversation with the same gesture. I have a consultation in an hour. Patient with complex arrhythmia. We'll talk tonight when you've calmed down and can approach this rationally. He left. Simply walked out like he'd announced a minor scheduling change rather than the complete demolition of their marriage. Mariah stood in their bedroom, his bedroom really, surrounded by evidence of wealth she'd grown accustomed to without ever quite believing it belonged to her. She looked around at the custom furniture, the original art, the view of Manhattan that announced status before guests even entered. None of it was hers. It was all backdrop for playing Mrs. Sebastian Hunt, a role she'd performed so thoroughly she'd forgotten who Mariah Castellano had been before accepting this part. Something shifted inside her, not breaking, but hardening, crystallizing into absolute clarity. Mariah moved with sudden purpose. She went to the closet that rivaled most people's bedrooms and pulled out an old duffel bag from the top shelf, one she'd brought when she first moved into this penthouse, back when she'd still believed marrying Sebastian Hunt was the beginning of something beautiful instead of the slow erasure of everything that made her herself. Into the bag she packed only what predated Sebastian. Worn jeans with paint stains from an art class she'd taken in graduate school, t-shirts soft from countless washings, each one carrying memories of the life she'd funded through her own labor. Her grandmother's quilt, the one irreplaceable thing she'd never let Sebastian replace with something more expensive and less meaningful. The camera that represented her identity before she became Mrs. Hunt, back when Mariah Castellano's name meant something all by itself. Everything else, the jewelry and velvet boxes, the designer handbags, the silk dresses that cost more than months of rent, she left untouched. None of it was really hers anyway. It belonged to the version of herself Sebastian had purchased when he married. Her, the woman he'd expected to remain grateful and compliant forever. She packed her grandmother's Bible, its pages soft with age and handling, margins filled with notes in handwriting she'd never see formed fresh again. A few photographs showing her history before this marriage, proof that she existed fully and completely before Sebastian Hunt entered her orbit. The single houseplant she'd kept alive through sheer determination, a small rebellion of tending something herself. In the kitchen, Mariah made one final cup of coffee in the expensive machine Sebastian had insisted they needed. She drank it standing by the window, looking out at the city where somewhere she'd have to build a life from almost nothing. The thought terrified her. The thought of staying terrified her more. She washed the cup carefully, dried it, placed it back in the cabinet where it belonged. No melodrama, no broken dishes or dramatic gestures. Just quiet completion of ordinary tasks that would be her last in this. Space that had never quite become home despite all her efforts. Then she moved to the entryway where they kept keys and mail and the accumulated debris of shared life. She removed her wedding rings with steady hands. The engagement ring caught morning light, refracting rainbows across the wall like a promise that had expired. She placed them exactly in the center of the marble console table. Next came the keys. House keys, car keys to vehicles registered in his name, keys to the Hamptons house and the cabin in Aspen she'd visited twice. She arranged them in a careful line beside the rings, geometric precision communicating clarity of purpose. Not scattered in anger, not thrown in rage, placed with deliberate care that said, I am choosing this, I am in control of my exit. Finally, she removed the credit cards from her wallet. The ones bearing Sebastian's name and account numbers she'd grown dependent on without realizing how completely. She stacked them neatly beside everything else, sharp-edged plastic representing a life she was rejecting. Mariah pulled out her phone and photographed the arrangement. Rings, keys, cards, all relinquished with geometric precision. Evidence, maybe. Or just documentation of the moment she chose herself over comfort. She composed a single text message to Sebastian, her fingers steady despite everything. You're right that I can't compete with your world, but you're catastrophically wrong about what I'm capable of building without it. Don't look for me. She blocked his number immediately, giving him no opportunity to respond, no chance to deploy charm or manipulation or threats to pull her back into his gravity. Mariah picked up her duffel bag, took one last look at the penthouse that had never actually become a home despite all her efforts to make it one, and walked out the front door. The December air hit her face, unseasonably cold. She stood on the sidewalk outside their building, his building, with everything she owned in one bag and $1,247 in her personal checking account. Money from selling her grandmother's vintage first editions that she'd been slowly accumulating without understanding why. Some survival instinct had prompted her to maintain even this tiny independence, like part of her knew this day was inevitable. Mariah pulled out her phone and called the one person who'd never stopped believing in her, even when she'd stopped believing in herself. Lucia, it's Mariah. I need a place to stay for a while. Just temporarily, until I figure things out. Her best friend from graduate school didn't ask questions, didn't waste time with shock or demands for explanation. Baby girl, I'm putting clean sheets on the guest bed right this second. Come home. Thank you. I'll explain everything when I get there. No need for explaining unless you want to talk. I've been praying for you to wake up and remember who you are. Sounds like my prayers just got answered. Mariah hung up and ordered a car, watching her location pin drop on the map. The driver was 11 minutes away. She spent those 11 minutes sitting on her duffel bag at the curb, watching clouds move across the sky, feeling more herself than she had in years, despite having just walked away from everything society told her she should cling to desperately. A pigeon landed nearby, pecking at the sidewalk for crumbs or seeds. It looked up at her once, head tilted in that distinctly bird-like assessment, then went back to its searching. Something about the simple purposefulness of it made Mariah smile, despite everything. When the car pulled up, the driver looked at her designer coat. She'd kept it because winter was coming and practicality mattered more than symbolism when it came to warmth, and the modest duffel bag with obvious confusion. The contrast didn't compute for him. Just the one bag, ma'am? That's all I need. And it was true. Everything essential fit in one bag. Everything else had been weight she'd mistaken for substance. Before we continue with what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If you've ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better, if you've ever walked away from comfort because staying meant losing yourself, hit that like button right now. And subscribe to Mr. Hearthline's stories because what Mariah does next will restore your faith in the power of choosing yourself. Drop a comment telling me, have you ever had to choose between security and self-respect? I read every single one because your stories matter. Now let's get back to how Mariah dismantled a billionaire's empire without lifting a finger. The car pulled away from the curb, and Mariah watched the building disappear in the side mirror. Sebastian was inside somewhere, probably already in his consultation, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. Not because she was vindictive, but because he'd built his empire on a foundation he'd never bothered to inspect or appreciate. And that foundation had just walked away. Lucia's brownstone in Fort Greene looked like sanctuary when Mariah arrived 40 minutes later. 3 stories of weathered brick, window boxes that would hold flowers. In spring, a neighborhood where people actually knew each other's names. It was modest by Sebastian's standards. It was perfect by every standard that actually mattered. Lucia opened the door before Mariah reached the porch, arms already extended, face showing no surprise at all. "Come here, baby girl. Come on home where you belong." Mariah fell into that embrace and finally let herself break. Just for a moment. Just long enough to purge the poison before building herself back stronger than she'd been before Sebastian Hunt convinced her to become smaller. Inside, Lucia settled her at the kitchen table with tea and the kind of presence that didn't demand explanation. The kitchen was warm, lived in, real in ways the penthouse had never achieved despite its 7-figure price tag. You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready. Mariah wrapped her hands around the mug, grounding herself in its physical warmth. He's been having an affair for 6 months, with a partner at his firm. He told me he wants to keep us both. Like I'm furniture he's gotten comfortable with and doesn't want to replace, but he needs something more exciting too. Lucia's expression didn't change, wasn't surprised by any of it. "And you chose to leave." "I chose myself." "That's more than leaving, baby. That's everything." I overheard him on the phone with her, planning to divorce me right after I signed some foundation papers on Friday, laughing about how I won't survive without his money, telling her I'll come back once reality sets in because women like me always do, women like you. Lucia's voice carried an edge that could cut glass. "He doesn't know the first thing about women like you, women like us. We survive things that would break people who've never had to build something from nothing. I'm scared, Lucia. I don't have a job. I haven't written anything in 7 years. My MFA feels ancient and useless. I have $1,200 and no plan and no idea if I can actually do this." "Good." Lucia reached across the table, squeezing Mariah's hand with fierce certainty. "Fear means you're awake and present. Comfort made you sleepwalk through disrespect. Now you're awake, and awake people can make real choices instead of just reacting. What if he's right? What if I can't survive without him? Then we'll find out together. But baby girl, you survived before him, and you'll survive after him. You just forgot for a while because you were too busy trying to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be." They sat in the kitchen as afternoon faded to evening, Lucia asking questions that gently excavated who Mariah had been before marriage reshaped her into something unrecognizable. "What did you used to dream about? Before all this?" Mariah thought back, reaching for memories that felt like someone else's life. "Writing. I wanted to write novels that mattered. Stories about real people facing impossible choices. I wanted my words to mean something to someone beyond just me." "Why did you stop?" "It wasn't one decision. It was 1,000 small accommodations. Sebastian needed me at a function. He had a crisis at work. I was tired from managing the household. My writing could wait until tomorrow, until next week, until next month. Then 7 years passed and tomorrow never came. So start tomorrow. Actually tomorrow. Wake up and write. I don't know if I have anything to say anymore. Then write about that." Lucia's voice was gentle but insistent. "Write about erasure. Write about becoming invisible in your own life. Write about choosing yourself when every practical argument says to stay small and safe." Mariah nodded, tears streaming down her face again, but different tears than before. Not grief anymore. Something closer to tentative hope. That night, sleeping in Lucia's guest room on sheets that smelled like lavender and safety, Mariah dreamed not of what she'd lost, but of what she might build with her own hands from the ground up. Across the city, Sebastian Hunt arrived home to an empty penthouse at 9 p.m., later than he, deplanned because the consultation had revealed complications requiring immediate intervention. He was thinking about surgical approaches and patient outcomes when he noticed the arrangement on the entryway table. The rings caught his eye first, then the keys, then the credit cards, all lined up with geometric precision that communicated clarity rather than chaos. He picked up his phone, saw Mariah's text, tried calling immediately. The number was blocked. He tried texting. Blocked. He tried email. No response. Sebastian stood in the foyer holding Mariah's wedding rings and, for the first time, felt something that might have been actual fear. She'd left. She'd actually left. He told himself she'd be back within days. This was theater designed to get his attention, make him grovel, maybe renegotiate the terms of his arrangement with Allison. Women threatened to leave all the time. They rarely followed through once reality demonstrated how difficult survival actually was without the comfort they'd grown accustomed to. Sebastian left the rings exactly where Mariah had placed them, making no effort to contact her through other channels. Let her have her tantrum in whatever cheap hotel she'd found. Let her feel powerful and righteous for 72 hours before desperation brought her back to his door with lowered expectations and newfound appreciation for what she had. He ordered Thai food using an app, watched a documentary about cardiac innovation in the living room where Mariah usually sat with her books, and felt nothing except mild annoyance at the disruption to his routine. The house was actually quieter without her constant need for connection and communication. He could get used to this. The first phone call came during his morning surgical consult, 2 days after Mariah left. His assistant interrupted with uncharacteristic urgency that suggested actual emergency rather than routine issue. "Mr. Hunt, I apologize for the interruption, but the bank has called 6 times in the last hour. They say it's extremely urgent and time-sensitive regarding your accounts." Sebastian excused himself with professional apologies to the potential investors, irritated at the interruption. Banks existed to solve problems quietly and efficiently, not create disruptions during important meetings. He returned the call expecting minor administrative issues, perhaps a fraud alert or routine verification requiring his attention. "Mr. Hunt, thank you for calling back. We have a significant situation developing that requires your immediate attention." The banker's voice carried carefully controlled panic that immediately sharpened Sebastian's focus. "Multiple accounts require immediate authorization for pending transactions. But we cannot proceed without Mrs. Hunt's signature confirmation. We've been unable to reach her for verification." The words made no immediate sense, like hearing familiar language with scrambled syntax. "What do you mean, my wife's signature? These are my accounts, my transactions. Why would her authorization be required?" "Sir, the accounts in question were restructured during comprehensive estate planning several years ago. Mrs. Hunt is listed as secondary signatory with authorization requirements for any transaction exceeding specific thresholds. At the time, this provided significant tax advantages and legal protection protocols. Without her confirmation, we are legally unable to process the pending transfers." Sebastian's irritation sharpened into focused alarm. "That must be an error in your system. Why would my personal accounts require my wife's signature for anything? I'm the primary account holder. It was part of the comprehensive estate planning restructuring your attorneys recommended in 2021. The banker spoke carefully, like approaching a dangerous animal. Asset protection protocols distributed liability across multiple entities. At the time, Mrs. Hunt's position as CO signatory provided certain legal advantages regarding tax implications and liability distribution. I don't care about historical reasoning. Override it. You have my authorization. Process the transactions." "Sir, we legally cannot do that without exposing the bank to substantial liability. The account structure requires both signatures for transactions exceeding the established thresholds. We've been attempting to reach Mrs. Hunt since yesterday for authorization, but she is not responding to any communication attempts through her registered contact information." Sebastian's stomach dropped, Mariah's departure suddenly feeling less like theater and more like calculated strategy. "How many accounts are we discussing?" The banker hesitated, and that pause communicated more than words could convey. 16 accounts currently have transactions pending authorization. Several are time-sensitive with deadlines approaching. The total value of frozen transactions is," another pause, "substantial, Mr. Hunt." Define substantial. The number the banker provided made Sebastian's vision swim momentarily. His entire cash flow infrastructure depended on those transactions processing seamlessly and invisibly. Without them, everything downstream collapsed like dominoes. Payroll for 3 companies, vendor payments for ongoing projects, investment commitments with penalties for delays, loan obligations at accrued interest daily. Everything. There has to be a legal workaround. Emergency procedures for situations exactly like this. The procedure requires either Mrs. Hunt's signature or a formal legal process to remove her from the accounts. That would necessitate considerable time and require either her cooperation or court orders establishing her unavailability or incapacitation. And how long would that process take? Weeks minimum, possibly months, depending on whether Mrs. Hunt contests the proceedings or cooperates. If she actively opposes the account restructuring, the banker trailed off, leaving the implication hanging like a threat. Sebastian ended the call, his hands trembling slightly, staring at his phone like it had personally betrayed him. Mariah couldn't have known about the account structures. She'd never paid attention to financial details, never asked questions about estate planning or asset protection strategies. This had to be coincidental timing, not deliberate sabotage. Before he could process the implications fully, his father called. The fury in the elder Hunt's voice came through before he even spoke. "Sebastian, what in God's name is going on? I've been trying to reach Mariah all morning and her phone gives some disconnected message. Where is your wife? We need her signature to release the next phase of funding for the waterfront development, and the deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. If we miss it, we forfeit millions in commitments and breach contracts that took 3 years to negotiate. The waterfront development." Sebastian had completely forgotten about the family trust restructuring from years ago. More legal maneuvering to protect assets through distributed liability that his attorneys had assured him was purely technical paperwork requiring minimal attention. "Can't we proceed without her? You're the primary trust holder. Your signature should be sufficient. The trust structure requires unanimous approval from all listed family members for disbursements exceeding $10 million. Your mother signed off yesterday morning. We need Mariah's signature by tomorrow at 5, or we're in breach. Now tell me where your wife is, and make it quick because I don't have time for whatever marital drama you've manufactured. We're separated. Temporarily. She left a few days ago. I don't know where she went." The silence on the line communicated volumes of disappointment and barely controlled rage. When his father spoke again, each word was precise and cutting. "You don't know where your wife is? We had a disagreement. She's staying somewhere else while she processes emotionally." "A disagreement?" His father's voice rose, professional control slipping. "We're about to breach contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars because you don't know where your wife is after some disagreement. What did you do, Sebastian? It's complicated. Personal matters that don't concern the business. Personal matters." His father's laugh was bitter. "Son, your personal matters just became everyone's business because you apparently can't keep your marriage intact long enough to get a signature on documents that affect dozens of families beyond just your own. Fix this. Today. I don't care what it takes. I don't care what you have to apologize for. I don't care if you have to crawl through broken glass on your hands and knees. Find her, make this right, and get her signature. Do you understand me?" His father hung up without waiting for a response, leaving Sebastian sitting in his office surrounded by symbols of success that suddenly felt like stage props in a play falling apart mid-performance. He tried calling Mariah from different phones. His office line, a colleague's cell phone, all blocked or going directly to that disconnected message. He tried texting from his assistant's number, with vague messages designed to slip past her defenses. No response. Messages showed delivered, then read, but generated no reply. Over the next 72 hours, the scope of the disaster became clear through a series of increasingly grim phone calls that arrived with the regularity of incoming tide. His corporate attorney called with news that managed to sound both sympathetic and judgmental simultaneously. "Sebastian, we have a problem. A significant one that requires immediate attention and strategy." "What kind of problem?" "When we executed your comprehensive asset restructuring, we distributed liability and authorization across multiple entities for tax advantages and legal protection. Your wife's signature appears on more documents and agreements than you probably realized or remembered. Without her cooperation, you're essentially frozen out of significant portions of your own financial infrastructure." "How did this happen? How did I not know about this?" The attorney's patience was wearing thin. "You signed off on all of it, Sebastian. You were present for every planning meeting. We reviewed these structures quarterly. This was intentional strategy at the time, and you approved every single element. You just never considered the possibility that she might leave or become uncooperative. Nobody does until it happens." Sebastian ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration Mariah used to find endearing. "I never thought she'd actually walk away. She had no reason to. I gave her everything. Well, she did walk away. And now you need to either convince her to return and sign what needs signing, or begin a lengthy legal process to restructure everything. That process will be expensive, time-consuming, publicly embarrassing, and will potentially expose you to Significant tax implications when we unwind structures specifically designed to avoid those implications. What are my options? Limited and unpleasant. The attorney's voice carried the resignation of someone delivering news he knew wouldn't be received well. You can try to locate her and negotiate her cooperation. You can offer her financial incentive to sign the necessary documents regardless of whether she returns to the marriage. Or you can begin legal proceedings to have her removed from these accounts and trusts, which will require months and need either her cooperation or evidence of her incapacity or unavailability. None of these options are quick or painless, Sebastian. Sebastian ended the call and sat in the silence of his home office, surrounded by evidence of achievement that suddenly felt meaningless. Diplomas from prestigious institutions, awards for medical innovation, photographs with influential people who no longer returned his calls with the same enthusiasm. He tried reaching out through mutual friends, people who'd attended their wedding, who'd celebrated their marriage with toasts about perfect couples and bright futures. His college roommate was the most direct, his voice carrying disappointment that cut deeper than anger would have. Why would I tell you where she is even if I knew? You told your wife you were keeping your mistress and expected her to accept it like some business arrangement. That's not a rough patch, Sebastian. That's you being a genuinely terrible human being. She left because you gave her absolutely no choice. Now you're dealing with consequences, and frankly, you deserve every single one. You knew. Sebastian couldn't keep the shock from his voice. About the affair, everyone knew. We just hoped you'd come to your senses before Mariah figured it out and left you. Apparently you didn't, and she did. Now you're surprised that actions have consequences. That's on you, man. Don't call me again unless it's to tell me you've become a better person, which seems unlikely at this point. The call ended. Another connection severed. Another bridge burned through his own arrogance and entitlement. By the end of the week, 19 more calls had come in from various entities, each one revealing another tentacle of his carefully constructed financial empire that reached back to accounts and trusts and structures suddenly requiring a signature he couldn't access because he'd driven away the person who controlled it. Vendors needed payment authorizations that required dual signatures. Investment managers couldn't proceed with planned portfolio moves. Partnership agreements were stalled pending confirmations Mariah alone could provide. Every piece of his financial infrastructure, built over years of careful planning, was grinding to a halt because one person had walked away. And that person had been his wife, the woman he'd dismissed as decorative infrastructure, the woman he'd told would never survive without him. Allison Rodriguez called at 8 p.m. on Friday, irritated that he'd canceled their plans for the fourth night in a row. I'm dealing with a crisis. Multiple crises, actually. Financial complications that require immediate attention. What kind of crisis? Her tone suggested she was already losing interest in problems that didn't directly affect her. Mariah left. Turns out she's embedded in my financial structure in ways I didn't fully appreciate or remember. Everything's frozen until I either get her back or legally remove her from these accounts, which could take months I don't have. The foundation deal collapsed. The waterfront development is in breach. I'm facing lawsuits from multiple partners because I can't access my own money to fulfill obligations. The line went silent for several beats too long. When Allison spoke again, her voice had cooled noticeably, professionally distant. Your wife left because of us, Sebastian. I thought you said you had an arrangement, that she knew about us and was fine with it. I was working toward that understanding, building toward a conversation where we could discuss terms that worked for everyone. Jesus Christ, Sebastian, listen to yourself. Allison's laugh carried no warmth whatsoever. You expected her to be fine with you keeping me around like I'm some kind of business asset. You told her you wanted both of us, and you're surprised she left. I thought she valued what we'd built together. Our life, our home, everything I provided for her. You thought she valued your money more than her self-respect. Allison's voice shifted from irritation to something closer to contempt. I need to think about whether I want to be involved in this kind of mess. Call me when your life isn't actively imploding and you've figured out how to be less of a disaster. She hung up, and Sebastian understood with crystalline clarity that she had been with him for what he represented, not who he was as a person. The moment his power and stability seemed questionable, she evaporated like morning fog. Substantial only as long as conditions supported her existence, he stood in his enormous penthouse, surrounded by expensive furniture and impressive art, and all the trappings of success that magazines photographed for lifestyle spreads. And he was completely alone in ways he'd never experienced before. Not just alone, powerless, watching his empire stall because he'd never bothered to understand that his wife wasn't decorative. She was structural, woven into his foundation in ways he'd authorized without truly comprehending. And now that foundation had walked away, and the entire structure was revealed as dangerously unstable. Meanwhile, 9 miles away in Fort Greene, Mariah Castellano sat at Lucia's kitchen table at 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, staring at her old laptop. The screen glowed in the darkness. A blank document, cursor blinking like a heartbeat, patient, waiting. Ready? Lucia found her there at dawn, surrounded by tea that had gone cold and barely touched. Couldn't sleep? Mariah shook her head. I kept thinking about what you said, about writing about erasure, about becoming invisible. So, I tried. I opened the laptop and just started. How much did you write? Mariah checked the word count, surprised. 4,200 words. I didn't mean to write that much. The words just came like I was excavating myself from rubble, one sentence at a time. Lucia read over her shoulder, silent for several minutes. Then she squeezed Mariah's shoulders with fierce pride. Baby girl, this is devastating and beautiful and true. What are you going to do with it? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe just needed to write it for myself. Or maybe you publish it. Lucia pulled up a chair, serious now. You're not the only woman who's ever felt erased by someone who claimed to love her. Your story might help someone else who thinks she's alone in this. Mariah looked at the essay she'd written. The mathematics of disappearing, how I became a ghost in my own marriage. Raw, honest, unflinching in ways that terrified her. What if people judge me? What if Sebastian sees it and comes after me legally? What if women read it and recognize themselves? What if your words give someone permission to leave a situation that's slowly killing who they actually are? Lucia's voice was gentle but insistent. That matters more than Sebastian's opinion or anyone's judgment. Mariah took a shaky breath, then created an account on Medium, a publishing platform she'd heard about but never used. She copied her essay into a new draft, her hands trembling over the keyboard. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she hit publish. The essay went live at 7:32 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Mariah closed her laptop immediately, terrified of what she'd just done. Exposed herself so completely, made her pain public, given strangers access to the most devastating moments of her life. She went back to bed, expecting nothing. Maybe a few dozen views from bots and algorithms. Maybe complete silence that would confirm her words didn't matter to anyone beyond herself. When she woke 4 hours later, her phone was exploding with notifications. The essay had 10,000 views, 500 comments, women sharing it with tags that made Mariah's throat tighten. This is me too. Emotional abuse awareness, reclamation stories. I thought I was alone. She scrolled through comments, each one a hand reaching through the screen. You wrote my life exactly. I thought I was crazy for feeling erased. Thank you for giving me language for what I couldn't describe. I left 3 months ago and keep wondering if I made a mistake. This reminded me why I had to go. Thank you. Sending this to every woman who thinks she's nothing without the man, who's been systematically destroying her sense of worth for years. You're a warrior. 20 years in a marriage where I disappeared completely. Reading this at 53 and realizing it's not too late to choose myself. Thank you for the permission I didn't know I needed. Mariah sat on Lucia's guest bed, crying while reading comments from women she'd never meet who saw themselves in her story. Her pain had purpose. Her survival was giving permission to others. This is amazing. Lucia stood in the doorway, beaming. Baby, you're helping people. Your words are mattering exactly the way you always wanted them to. I published one essay. That doesn't mean anything long term. Then write another one, and another one. Keep excavating. Keep being honest. See what happens. Over the next week, Mariah wrote with intensity that bordered on obsession. Every day, new essays. What I learned from walking away with $1,247 and no plan. He said I couldn't survive without him. I'm thriving out of spite. The specific mathematics of self-worth when someone tries to convince you that you have none. Each essay found its audience. Each one went viral in communities of women waking up to their own worth. Each one generated hundreds of comments from people whose lives were changing because Mariah had chosen to be devastatingly honest about her own transformation. 10 days after she'd published her first essay, Mariah received an email that made her hands shake. Miss Castellano, my name is Jennifer Walsh. I'm a literary agent with Hartley & Marks. I've been following your essays on Medium with great interest. Your work has something increasingly rare in today's market. Absolute honesty without self-pity. Vulnerability without victimhood. I believe you have a book here, a memoir that could reach millions of women who need exactly what you're offering. Would you be interested in discussing representation and potential publication? Mariah read the email 3 times, convinced it was spam or a scam or some kind of mistake. Literary agents didn't reach out to people who'd published a handful of essays online, certainly not to MFA graduates who hadn't written anything meaningful in 7 years. She showed Lucia, who read it once and immediately started researching the agency. This is legitimate. Major agency, impressive client list, recent bestsellers. Baby girl, this is real. They probably send this to everyone. Form email designed to generate interest and hope. Then reply and find out. What do you have to lose? Mariah replied that evening, trying to sound professional and competent rather than desperate and disbelieving. She expected either silence or a form rejection, explaining they'd made a mistake. Jennifer Walsh responded within 2 hours. Let's schedule a call for tomorrow. I think you're sitting on something extraordinary, and I'd like to discuss how we move forward. The call happened at 10 a.m. the next morning. Jennifer Walsh was direct, enthusiastic, and utterly convinced that Mariah's story had commercial and cultural value. Your essays are resonating because you're writing about something universal, the experience of disappearing into someone else's life, the terror and exhilaration of choosing yourself when every practical argument says to stay small and safe. Every woman understands this on some level, even if the specifics are different. I've only been writing for 2 weeks. I don't have a platform or credentials or anything that would make publishers interested. You have a voice that people are responding to in droves. Jennifer's confidence was absolute. Your Medium essays have generated over 200,000 cumulative views in 10 days. That's platform. That's proof of concept. Publishers will see that engagement and understand you can reach an audience. What would a memoir even look like? I don't want to write a revenge fantasy or position myself as a victim. You write it exactly like your essays. Honest, reflective, focused on your transformation rather than his failures. The story of how you built yourself back from nothing after someone convinced you that you were nothing. That's the narrative arc that will resonate. They talked for 90 minutes. By the end, Mariah had agreed to representation and committed to writing a proposal for a memoir about leaving her marriage and rebuilding her life from $1,247 and a duffel bag. She hung up and sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened. Lucia found her there, motionless, staring at nothing. Baby, what's wrong? What did she say? Mariah looked up, tears streaming. She wants to represent me. She thinks I can sell this. She thinks my story matters to people beyond just me. Lucia pulled her into a fierce hug. Your story has always mattered. You just forgot for a while when you were too busy trying to matter to someone who'd stopped seeing you. Over the next 3 weeks, Mariah wrote the book proposal. 20,000 words outlining her story, her transformation, the lessons she'd learned about self-worth and survival and choosing yourself when everyone says you're making a mistake. Jennifer submitted the proposal to publishers on a Friday morning. By Monday afternoon, 3 publishers had requested full meetings. By Wednesday, there were 5 publishers interested. By Friday, they were in a bidding war. Jennifer called with news that didn't seem real. We have an offer. Actually, we have multiple offers. The highest is currently at $175,000 for your memoir, with the numbers still climbing. Mariah sat down abruptly, her legs no longer supporting her weight. Sebastian had told her that her writing was a hobby, that she'd never make real money from it, that she needed him. And now, 3 weeks after walking away, a publisher was offering her more money than most people earned in 3 years for doing exactly what he'd dismissed as worthless. What do? We let them keep bidding. Jennifer's smile was audible. You're in demand, Mariah. Own that. The final offer came in at $225,000 for North American rights, with additional money for international sales and potential film adaptation. Mariah accepted, signed the contract, and stared at the advance payment schedule. That would fund her survival and independence for the foreseeable future. She'd walked away from Sebastian's penthouse with $1,247. 4 weeks later, she'd earned more from her own words, her own work, her own voice than she'd ever imagined possible. That evening, sitting in Lucia's living room with Chinese takeout and cheap wine, Mariah finally let herself feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. You did it, baby girl. Lucia raised her glass in toast. You survived, and now you're thriving. Just like I knew you would. I was so scared. I'm still scared. This could all disappear tomorrow. It won't disappear because it's built on your actual talent and work, not someone else's money. Lucia clinked their glasses together. This is yours. Really, truly yours. Nobody can take it away. Mariah took a sip of wine, let that truth settle into her bones like medicine. She'd chosen herself over comfort. She'd walked away from everything Sebastian's wealth provided. And she'd discovered she'd never needed any of it. She just needed permission to stop performing someone else's version of her life. Her phone buzzed. An email from her new publisher with subject line, Marketing Strategy. Your story matters. Mariah opened it, read about publicity plans and media interviews, and the reach her memoir could have, helping women recognize emotional abuse, giving permission to leave situations slowly destroying them, using her survival as a blueprint others could follow. This is what I always wanted. For my words to mean something to someone beyond just me. They always meant something. Lucia's voice was fierce with conviction. You just forgot while you were too busy meaning something to someone who never deserved you in the first place. Across the city, Sebastian Hunt sat alone in his penthouse, scrolling through industry news, and saw Mariah's name in Publishers Marketplace. The announcement made his blood run cold. Major deal for Mariah Castellano's memoir, Aftermath Resolution, reclaiming myself after disappearing into someone else's life. The story of leaving her billionaire husband and rebuilding from nothing, sold in heated auction for 6 figures. She wasn't coming back. Not ever. This announcement made that absolutely clear. She'd done exactly what he'd told her was impossible. She'd survived without him. More than survived. She'd transformed her survival into something valuable that people were willing to pay for. Sebastian had spent 4 weeks telling himself Mariah would return. Once reality demonstrated how difficult independence actually was, he'd been waiting for her to come back with lowered expectations, ready to accept his arrangement, grateful for whatever scraps of his attention he deigned to provide. Instead, she'd built a career from the wreckage of their marriage. She'd turned her pain into purpose and her survival into a story that mattered to hundreds of thousands of people. He'd lost her completely, and he was only just beginning to understand what that loss actually meant. The weeks following Mariah's book deal announcement became a study in parallel realities. 2 people who'd once shared everything now living completely separate lives that occasionally intersected. Through industry gossip and mutual acquaintances who couldn't resist sharing updates neither had asked for. Mariah moved out of Lucia's guest room 6 weeks after leaving Sebastian. Not into luxury, but into a studio apartment in Sunset Park that cost $800 a month and required her to share a bathroom with the tenant across the hall. The building was old, the radiator clanked like it was possessed, and the view from her single window showed a brick wall and a sliver of sky. It was perfect. She furnished it with second-hand discoveries from thrift stores and sidewalk finds. A desk someone had painted turquoise and abandoned. A chair that wobbled slightly but supported her weight. A futon that doubled as couch and bed, saving precious space. She hung her photographs on walls that had probably never displayed art, creating a gallery of moments that mattered. Her grandmother's quilt covered the futon. The houseplant thrived on the windowsill, finally receiving direct attention, instead of staff maintenance that kept it alive but never let it flourish. This space was smaller than Sebastian's walk-in closet had been. It was infinitely more valuable because it represented actual freedom. Every morning, Mariah woke at 5 a.m. and wrote, not because publishers were waiting, though they were, but because the words kept coming like a dam had broken inside her. 7 years of silence, pouring out in torrents she couldn't control even if she wanted to. She wrote about the botanical garden proposal, back when Sebastian had seemed like a man who saw her completely. She wrote about the slow disappearance, how accommodation became erasure one small compromise at a time. She wrote about overhearing the phone call, that moment of crystalline clarity when denial was no longer possible. The writing was therapeutic and devastating in equal measure. Some mornings she cried while typing, reliving pain she'd compartmentalized to survive. Other mornings she laughed at her own naivete, at how thoroughly she did convince herself that love required constant self-diminishment. Her editor called every week with gentle check-ins that felt more like therapy than business. How's it coming, Mariah? No pressure, but we're all excited about this project. It's hard. Mariah admitted, staring at her turquoise desk covered in notes and coffee rings. Revisiting these memories, examining how I let myself disappear, it's harder than I expected. That difficulty is what will make it resonate. Her editor's voice was kind but firm. Easy stories don't change lives. The hard ones do. The ones where the writer is willing to excavate their own complicity alongside documenting someone else's cruelty. I don't want to seem like a victim. You're not writing victimhood. You're writing survival. There's a profound difference, and your readers will feel it. Mariah kept writing, chapter after chapter, excavating herself from the rubble of who she'd been forced to become. The manuscript grew like a living thing, demanding attention and honesty she hadn't known she possessed. Meanwhile, across the city, Sebastian's professional collapse accelerated with the inevitability of a building with structural damage finally succumbing to gravity. The board of Hunt Medical Technologies called an emergency meeting 6 weeks after Mariah left. Sebastian sat at the head of the conference table he presided over for 8 years and watched his own company vote him out of operational control. Mr. Hunt, we appreciate everything you've built here, but the current situation has created untenable complications for the company's stability. His own CFO couldn't meet his eyes while delivering the news. The frozen accounts, the missed obligations, the public perception issues. We need to protect the company and our employees. Effective immediately, you'll transition to advisory role only. Marcus Chen will assume CEO responsibilities. Marcus Chen, his former protege, who'd learned everything from Sebastian and was now replacing him. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. You're firing me from my own company. We're restructuring leadership to ensure operational continuity. The CFO's corporate speak couldn't disguise what was happening. You'll maintain ownership stake and receive appropriate compensation. But active management requires someone without your current complications. Sebastian wanted to fight, to argue, to remind them that none of this would exist without him. But the votes had already been cast. The decision was made. He was being removed from the empire he'd built because he'd been too arrogant to understand that his wife was woven into its foundation. He left the building that afternoon through the back entrance, avoiding employees who'd once competed for his attention. His assistant of 6 years had already been reassigned to Marcus. His office was being packed by people who wouldn't meet his gaze. At home, his father was waiting in the penthouse lobby. The elder Hunt looked older than Sebastian remembered, worn down by disappointment and public embarrassment his son had caused. We need to talk. His father's voice carried no warmth, just exhausted resignation. They rode the elevator in silence. In the penthouse, surrounded by expensive furniture that had witnessed the beginning of this collapse, his father finally spoke. Your mother and I are removing you from the family foundation board. The announcement will go out tomorrow morning. Sebastian felt something crack inside his chest. Dad, please, don't do this. You did this, Sebastian. His father's control finally slipped, revealing the fury beneath. You threw away a good woman because you thought you deserved more than you'd earned. You jeopardized projects that affect hundreds of families because you couldn't keep your marriage intact long enough to get signatures on crucial documents. You embarrassed this family publicly and repeatedly. I made mistakes. I know that now. I'm trying to fix things. You can't fix this. His father stood, preparing to leave. You can only live with the consequences and try to become someone who wouldn't make these mistakes again. And that work takes years, Sebastian. Years you'll spend without the safety net you've relied on your entire life. What does that mean? It means you're on your own. No more family money bailing you out. No more using our name to open doors your behavior should have closed. You built this disaster. You get to rebuild from it without our help. His father left, and Sebastian understood that he'd lost more than his wife and his company. He'd lost his family's respect, the foundation he'd taken for granted his entire life. That night, alone in the penthouse that suddenly felt like a mausoleum, Sebastian made an appointment with a therapist. Not because he wanted to, but because he literally had no one left to talk to. Every friend had distanced themselves. His family had severed ties. Allison had moved on to someone whose life wasn't actively imploding. He was utterly, completely alone in ways wealth couldn't fix. The therapist, Dr. Patricia Morrison, was in her 60s with sharp eyes that saw through every deflection Sebastian attempted. Tell me why you're here. My wife left me. My business partners forced me out. My family disowned me. Everything's falling apart, and I don't know how to fix it. Why did your wife leave? Sebastian hesitated, then decided honesty might be his only path forward. I was having an affair. I told her I wanted to keep both relationships, her and my mistress. I thought she'd accept it because she depended on my money. I was wrong. Dr. Morrison nodded, making notes. What did you expect would happen when you proposed that arrangement? I expected her to be practical. Other wives accept these situations. I thought she valued comfort over pride. But she didn't. No. She walked away with almost nothing and built a career from the wreckage of our marriage. She's about to publish a memoir that will probably make her more famous than I ever was. And I'm sitting here having lost everything that actually mattered. Do you want her back? Sebastian considered carefully. I want to not have destroyed the best thing in my life through arrogance and entitlement. I want to undo what I did. But I know that's impossible. So what do you want that's actually achievable? I want to understand why I did it. Why I wasn't satisfied with what I had. Why I needed to prove I could have everything, even when having everything meant destroying what mattered most. That's good. Dr. Morrison leaned forward. That's the first honest thing you've said since walking in here. Let's start there. The therapy sessions became Sebastian's only anchor as everything else dissolved. Twice a week he sat in Dr. Morrison's office and examined the wreckage of his own making. You talk about your wife like she was a possession you lost. Dr. Morrison challenged him during their 4th session. Not a person who made a choice, but an object that was taken from you. I don't mean it that way. Then how do you mean it? Because your language reveals how you see her, as something you had and lost, rather than someone you hurt who chose to leave. Sebastian sat with that, uncomfortable with the accuracy. I think I saw her as an extension of my life, not her own complete person. She existed in relation to me, not independently. And when she left, I realized I'd never actually known who she was beyond what she did for me. That's progress. Real progress. Dr. Morrison made notes. Now tell me about the affair. What were you looking for that your marriage wasn't providing? Excitement. Validation. Proof that I was still desirable, still powerful enough to attract someone despite being married. So, ego. Sebastian flinched. Yes, ego. I wanted to prove I could have whatever I wanted whenever I wanted it. And I destroyed my marriage to prove something that didn't actually matter. The sessions continued, each one excavating another layer of Sebastian's entitlement and arrogance. It was brutal, necessary work that left him exhausted and raw. While Sebastian sat in therapy confronting his failures, Mariah was discovering that her voice mattered to more people than she'd ever imagined possible. A community center in Sunset Park reached out 2 months after she'd started publishing essays online. The director, a woman named Rosa Martinez, had been following Mariah's work with increasing interest. We serve women leaving difficult situations. Domestic violence, economic abuse, controlling relationships. They need to rediscover their voices, remember who they are beyond the trauma. Would you consider teaching a creative writing workshop? Mariah hesitated. I'm barely surviving myself. I don't know if I'm qualified to teach anyone. That's exactly why you're perfect. Rosa's conviction was absolute. You're not teaching from theory or academic distance. You're teaching from the trenches. These women need to see someone who's still bleeding but moving forward anyway. Mariah agreed to teach one 8-week session, expecting maybe 5 or 6 students. 19 women showed up to the first class, ranging in age from 18 to 67, each one carrying visible and invisible wounds. She stood before them in a community center with fluorescent lights and plastic chairs and felt like an imposter. What did she have to teach these women about survival when she was still figuring it out herself? I'm not here to teach you how to write perfectly, Mariah began, her voice steadier than she felt. I'm here to help you write honestly, to give you space to say the things you've been too afraid to say out loud. We're not creating literature. We're creating truth. She gave them their first prompt. Write the sentence you've been carrying in silence, the one you've never said out loud because saying it would make it real. The room fell silent, except for pens scratching paper. Some women cried while writing. Others smiled grimly. A few laughed, bitter and knowing. When they read their sentences aloud, Mariah understood she was witnessing something sacred. Permission being granted, truth being spoken, silence being broken. He told me I was worthless every day until I believed him. A woman named Carmen read, her voice shaking. I left 3 weeks ago, and I'm still trying to remember what I'm worth. I stayed for 23 years because I thought my children needed an intact family. Patricia, a woman in her 50s, wiped tears while reading. They needed a mother who valued herself. I failed them by staying. He controlled every dollar, every friend, every minute of my day. Deshawn read quietly. I escaped with my 2 kids and $47. We're living in a shelter, and I've never been more free. Each woman's story resonated with the others. They weren't alone. Their experiences weren't unique. The isolation they'd felt was manufactured by people who needed them to believe no one would understand. After class, Carmen approached Mariah with nervous determination. I'm still living with my boyfriend, but I'm planning to leave. Watching you, hearing your story, it helps me believe I can actually do this. Mariah squeezed her hand, seeing her own reflection from months earlier. You can. The fear doesn't go away. You just decide your freedom matters more than your fear. He tells me I'm nothing without him, that I'll fail if I try to leave. Mariah felt fierce protectiveness rise in her chest. He's wrong, and deep down, he knows it. That's why he keeps saying it. Strong people don't need to diminish others. His need to make you feel small tells you everything about his actual strength. Carmen left clutching her notebook like a lifeline, and Mariah understood that her pain had purpose beyond just her own healing. It was a map for others still trying to find their way out. The workshops became the highlight of Mariah's week. Every Tuesday evening, she gathered with women who were remembering their worth one sentence at a time. They wrote about their experiences, their fears, their hopes for futures they were building from ruins. Several students started publishing their own essays online. Carmen left her boyfriend and moved in with her sister, writing about the terror and exhilaration of choosing herself. Patricia filed for divorce after 23 years, documenting her journey for other women considering the same leap later in life. Deshawn started a blog about single motherhood and survival that gained thousands of followers. Mariah watched them transform and understood this was legacy, not money or fame or traditional markers of success. This, women helping women remember their worth, voices being reclaimed, silence being shattered. 5 months after leaving Sebastian, Mariah's memoir was complete. 100,000 words excavating her marriage, her disappearance, her choice to leave, and her reconstruction of self from almost nothing. She sent it to her editor and waited, terrified it wasn't good enough, wasn't honest enough, wasn't what people actually needed. Her editor called 6 hours later. Mariah, I just finished reading. I'm crying at my desk and I don't care who sees. This is extraordinary, devastating and hopeful and absolutely necessary. We're going to publish this as fast as humanly possible because people need it now. The book went into production with unusual speed. Cover design, copy editing, marketing strategy, everything accelerated because the publisher recognized they had something special. 3 weeks before publication, Mariah did her first major interview. NPR's Fresh Air with Terry Gross, a program she'd listened to for years without imagining she'd ever be a guest. She sat in the studio, heart pounding, while Terry Gross asked questions that required real answers, not practiced deflections. Do you write that your husband offered you an arrangement? You, him, and his mistress. What went through your mind when he proposed this? Mariah took a breath, choosing honesty. Clarity, absolute crystalline clarity that I'd been negotiating myself into smaller spaces for years, and this was the moment where there was no space left. So I left entirely. You walked away from significant wealth. That must have been terrifying. It was, but staying was more terrifying. The fear of struggling alone turned out to be less painful than the reality of struggling beside someone who no longer saw my value. What would you say to women staying in marriages because they're afraid of financial instability? I'd say fear is information, not instruction. Yes, leaving is terrifying. Yes, struggling is hard. But struggling while honoring yourself is completely different from suffering while betraying yourself. One breaks you, the other builds you. The interview aired, and Mariah's phone exploded. Messages from women who'd heard themselves in her words. Emails from readers who'd pre-ordered her book. Interview requests from podcasts and television shows and magazines. Her publisher called with news that seemed impossible. We're going back for a third printing before the official publication date. Pre-orders are exceeding our wildest projections. Mariah, you're about to be a bestseller. The book launched on a Tuesday in October, exactly 10 months after Mariah had walked out of Sebastian's penthouse. Aftermath resolution, reclaiming myself after disappearing into someone else. Life debuted at number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. Reviews poured in from major publications, each one recognizing what Mariah had accomplished. The New York Times book review called it devastating honesty about marriage, power, and the mathematics of self-worth. The Washington Post wrote, Mariah Castellano writes like she's saving her own life because she is. Kirkus gave it a starred review, declaring it essential reading for anyone who's ever made themselves smaller for someone else's comfort. Mariah's media tour became a whirlwind of early morning television appearances, podcast, interviews, bookstore readings, packed with women holding her book like it was scripture. On The View, Whoopi Goldberg asked the question everyone wanted answered. What would you say to your ex-husband if he's watching right now? Mariah considered carefully, aware that Sebastian was probably watching, unable to help himself. I'd say thank you for teaching me what I'm capable of surviving and building. You thought breaking my heart would break me. Instead, it freed me to become who I always was, beneath who I thought I needed to be for you. The audience erupted in applause, recognizing the power of choosing grace over vengeance, truth over cruelty. Robin Roberts interviewed her on Good Morning America, leaning forward with genuine curiosity. Your ex-husband told you that you wouldn't survive a week without him. You're now a best-selling author. What do you want to say to him? Nothing. Mariah's smile was genuine, free of bitterness. My life is my response. Success is the best reply to people who underestimate you. I don't need to say anything to him. I just need to keep building what he said was impossible. A clip of that interview went viral, shared millions of times with captions like, "This is what choosing yourself looks like, and the best revenge is living well." Mariah became a symbol for women everywhere who'd been told they were nothing without someone else. Her social media following exploded to over 500,000 across platforms. Every day brought messages from women whose lives were changing because Mariah had chosen to be devastatingly honest about her own transformation. I left my husband last night after reading your book. I have $300 and my kids in terror and hope. Thank you for showing me it's possible. 56 years old and finally filing for divorce after 30 years of making myself invisible. Your story gave me permission I didn't know I needed. Sent your book to my daughter who's in a controlling relationship. She called me crying yesterday and said she's leaving. You saved her life. Each message reminded Mariah why the pain of writing her story had been worth it. Every word of excavation, every moment of vulnerability, every honest accounting of her own complicity alongside Sebastian's cruelty. It mattered to people beyond just herself. Before we continue, I need you to do something. If this story is giving you life, if you're feeling that satisfaction of watching someone prove their doubters wrong, hit that subscribe button right now. Drop a like if you believe in second chances and new beginnings. And comment below, what's something someone told you that you couldn't do, that you proved them wrong about? Share your victories, because they matter. Now, let's get back to the story. Because Sebastian is watching all of this, and what happens next will bring them face to face for the first time since she walked away. While Mariah's star rose, Sebastian's continued falling. He'd lost his company, his family's support, and his social standing. But the most devastating loss was watching Mariah succeed in ways he'd told her were impossible. He watched every interview from his penthouse at 3 a.m. when insomnia kept him awake. He read every review of her book, each one a mirror showing him who he'd been through her eyes. The reflection was unrecognizable. In therapy, Dr. Morrison asked questions he couldn't deflect. You've been watching your ex-wife's interviews obsessively. What are you looking for? Sebastian struggled to articulate the compulsion. Proof that she's thinking about me, maybe? Evidence that what we had still matters to her? But what you're finding is that she's moved completely beyond you, that she's built a life and career and purpose that has nothing to do with you at all. Yes, and that's... Sebastian paused, searching for honesty. That's more devastating than if she was angry. Anger would mean I still mattered to her emotional landscape. This indifference means I've become irrelevant. How does that feel? Like watching someone I killed come back to life and thrive without me. Like understanding that everything I thought made me valuable, my wealth, my status, my power, meant nothing to the one person whose opinion should have mattered most. Do you want her back? Sebastian had been asked this before, but his answer was evolving. I want to not be the kind of person who did what I did. I want to undo the harm, but I know that's impossible. So, I guess I want to become someone who wouldn't make these mistakes again, even though that doesn't fix anything for her. That's growth. Real growth. Dr. Morrison made notes. But growth for your own sake, not to win her back. Can you accept that she's gone permanently? I'm trying to. It's hard when I see her everywhere, succeeding at everything I told her she couldn't do. Maybe that's your punishment, watching her thrive without you while you sit with the consequences of your choices. Sebastian nodded, accepting the assessment because arguing would be pointless when she was so clearly right. 1 year after Mariah had walked away, Sebastian received an invitation that felt like a cosmic joke. The 92nd Street Y was hosting an evening honoring women entrepreneurs who'd rebuilt their lives from difficult circumstances. Mariah Castellano was the featured speaker, receiving an award for impact and inspiration. The invitation was addressed to him because he'd donated to the organization for years. Probably automated, not realizing the exquisite irony of inviting him to watch his ex-wife be celebrated for surviving him. He should decline, should avoid the pain of seeing her in person after a year of watching from digital distance. But something compelled him to accept. Maybe the need to see with his own eyes what he'd lost. Maybe faint hope that seeing her would make him feel something other than hollow regret. Sebastian confirmed his attendance and began psychological preparation for facing the woman who'd survived his destruction and become more impressive in his absence than she'd ever been allowed to be in his presence. The night of the event arrived with December cold that cut through expensive coats like accusations. Sebastian sat in the back row of the 92nd Street Y auditorium, watching the room fill with 550 people who'd come to hear Mariah speak. He recognized some faces from their former social circle, women who'd attended dinner parties at their penthouse, who'd smiled at him while privately judging his treatment of his wife. Their expressions when they noticed him ranged from surprise to poorly concealed contempt. Sebastian kept his head down, trying to be invisible in a crowd that had no reason to protect him from judgment he'd earned. The lights dimmed. The program began with opening remarks from various honorees, women who'd built businesses from nothing, who'd survived cancer and bankruptcy and abuse and emerged with purpose and power. Then Mariah's name was called, and Sebastian's breath stopped. She walked onto the stage wearing a dress she'd clearly designed herself, elegant and unique in ways department store purchases could never achieve. Her natural hair was styled in a way he'd never seen, free and unconstrained. She looked radiant, genuinely happy, alive in ways she'd never been during their marriage. Sebastian realized with sharp clarity that he'd kept her diminished without even knowing it, simply by being the kind of man who took up all available space and expected everyone else to shrink to accommodate him. Mariah stood at the podium, scanning the audience while her breath steadied. She didn't see him in the back row, or maybe she did and chose not to acknowledge him. Either way, when she spoke, her voice was clear and strong and absolutely certain. 1 year ago today, I had $1,247, a suitcase of old clothes, and absolutely no idea if I would survive the week. My husband had told me I couldn't. His mistress agreed. Even I wasn't sure. The audience leaned forward collectively, drawn into her story. But I want to tell you what I learned about survival in this year that changed my life completely. Mariah told her story with the skill of someone who'd excavated it thoroughly, who understood its shape and weight and meaning. She spoke about overhearing Sebastian's call, about the arrangement he'd proposed, about walking away from everything into almost nothing. Her words painted pictures that made the audience gasp, laugh, cry. She was masterful, commanding the room with nothing but honesty and hard-won wisdom. I published my first essay 2 weeks after leaving. I was terrified no one would care, that my words wouldn't matter to anyone beyond just me. But something extraordinary happened. Women started reaching out, saying I thought I was alone, saying you wrote my life exactly, saying thank you for permission I didn't know I needed. Mariah's voice strengthened with each sentence. That's when I understood that my pain had purpose beyond my own healing. It was a map for others still trying to find their way out of situations slowly destroying them. And that understanding changed everything. She talked about the workshops, about teaching women to reclaim their voices, about her students who'd left abusive situations and started publishing their own stories, about building community from shared survival. Then she said something that made Sebastian's stomach drop. I need to thank someone who probably isn't comfortable being mentioned. I want to thank the person who broke my heart so completely that I had no choice but to rebuild myself from scratch. Because sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the catalyst for discovering who we actually are beneath who we thought we needed to be for someone else's comfort. Murmurs rippled through the audience, people making connections and assumptions. I spent years making myself smaller to fit someone else's vision of appropriate partnership. I accommodated, I adjusted, I convinced myself that love required endless flexibility from me while demanding nothing from them. Then that person made it impossible to continue the pretense, and I discovered something essential. I was stronger without that relationship than I'd ever been allowed to be within it. Sebastian felt tears streaming down his face, unable to stop them even if he wanted to. She wasn't being cruel. She was being accurate, and accuracy was more devastating than cruelty could ever be. So here's what I want to share with anyone listening who needs to hear it. Mariah's voice rang clear through the auditorium. You are not defined by what others provide you. You're not diminished by choosing yourself over situations that require you to disappear. And you are infinitely more capable than anyone who diminishes you will ever let you believe. Walking away is not failure. Sometimes it's the bravest and most necessary choice you'll ever make. And what you build afterward will be more valuable than anything you left behind because it will actually be yours. The room erupted in sustained applause, people standing, recognizing that she'd spoken truth many understood intimately, but rarely heard articulated so clearly. The question and answer session brought more revelation. Do you regret marrying him? I regret staying longer than I should have, but I don't regret the lessons. I just wish they'd been cheaper. Would you ever reconcile? No. You can't go back to someone who showed you they're capable of treating you as disposable. You can forgive, you can heal, but you don't hand them another opportunity to harm you. What would you tell your younger self? That your worth exists independent of someone else's recognition of it, and that loving yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. The event ended with embraces, tears, promises to stay connected. Mariah had sparked something in that room, permission to choose themselves, and Sebastian Hunt sat in the back row understanding he'd witnessed his own ghost speaking about surviving him. The crowd thinned gradually. Sebastian stayed in his seat, not ready to leave, not knowing what came next. Then he saw her near the windows, alone for the first time all evening. He approached slowly, carefully, like approaching something wild that might bolt. Mariah turned, and when she saw him, she didn't look surprised, just resigned, like she'd known this moment was inevitable. I knew you'd be here. Your speech was extraordinary, devastating and extraordinary. Thank you. They stood in awkward silence, strangers who'd once known everything about each other, now struggling to find words that mattered. Could we talk? Properly, I mean. There are things I need to say that feel incomplete. Mariah considered, and Sebastian held his breath waiting for her answer. 20 minutes. There's a coffee shop 2 blocks away. They walked through Manhattan streets separately, side by side, but miles apart. The geography of strangers who'd once shared everything. In the coffee shop, they sat across from each other with drinks neither particularly wanted. Sebastian spoke first, words he'd rehearsed, but that still came out inadequate. I've wanted to reach out for months, to apologize properly, to explain why I did what I did, why I was so catastrophically wrong about everything. Mariah's expression didn't change. I understand perfectly why you did what you did. You valued your ego more than our marriage. You thought I needed you more than my self-respect. You were wrong. There's nothing complicated about it. It's more layered than that. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly that simple and clear. Sebastian ran his hand through his hair. The gesture Mariah used to find endearing now just seemed like nervous deflection. I made terrible, unforgivable mistakes. I hurt you in ways I can't take back or repair. But I never stopped. He paused, reconsidering his words. I got lost in who I thought I was supposed to be. The powerful man who could have everything. I forgot that having everything means nothing if you destroy what matters most to get it. The man who loved me wouldn't have done what you did. So maybe you felt something you called love, but you definitely stopped choosing me long before I left. There's a difference between feeling something and acting on it consistently. You're right. Sebastian accepted the assessment without deflection. I'm not defending what I did. I'm just trying to explain that I didn't understand what I was destroying until it was already destroyed. Until you were gone, and I was standing in the wreckage realizing what I'd lost. That's not an explanation. That's you admitting you take people for granted until they're no longer available to be exploited. Most people who hurt others figure that out eventually. Doesn't change what they did. They sat in tense silence, both holding coffee that had gone lukewarm. What would you have done differently? Mariah asked finally, genuine curiosity in her voice. If you could go back knowing what you know now, what actually changes? Sebastian considered seriously, trying to give an honest answer instead of just saying what he thought she wanted to hear. Everything. I would have appreciated what we had instead of always looking for something that seemed more exciting. I would have read your stories instead of dismissing your work as a hobby that didn't matter. I would have made space for you to grow instead of expecting you to orbit my life like a satellite. I would have chosen you every single day instead of taking for granted that you'd always be there waiting while I did whatever I wanted. Those are good answers, very polished and self-aware. Mariah nodded slowly. But here's what I've learned. People don't change who they fundamentally are. They just get better at hiding what they don't like about themselves until pressure reveals it again. You're capable of what you did to me. That capacity doesn't evaporate just because you regret the consequences. So you think people can't grow? Can't become better versions of themselves through genuine work? I think people can grow. I've grown more in this year apart than I did in our entire marriage. But growth requires acknowledging what's broken in us and doing the painful work to repair it, not just feeling bad about consequences after damage is done. Sebastian leaned forward, desperate for her to understand. I am doing that work. I'm in therapy twice a week. I'm examining why I made the choices I made, what drives me to sabotage good things, how I can become someone worthy of second chances even if you'll never give me one. That's genuinely good. I hope you succeed. But your growth doesn't require my participation or forgiveness to be valid. You need to become better for yourself and whoever comes after me, not to win me back. I'm not trying to win you back. Sebastian said it quickly, like he'd been accused of something. I know that's impossible now. I just wanted you to know I see what I couldn't see before. That you were the best thing in my life, and I destroyed it through arrogance, and entitlement and thinking I deserved more than I'd earned. Mariah studied him, seeing genuine pain in his expression. I appreciate you saying that. It doesn't change anything between us, but acknowledgement matters for both our healing. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. Do you ever think about the good parts? Before everything fell apart? Do those memories mean anything now, or did what happened erase them completely? Mariah thought carefully before responding, wanting to be truthful rather than kind. They mean I was capable of genuine love once, that I gave myself fully to someone I believed deserved it. They remind me I have that capacity still, but they also remind me to value myself enough not to stay when someone shows me through their actions that they don't value me back. So yes, they mean something, just not what you probably wish they meant. Sebastian absorbed this, pain evident in every line of his face. I saw you on television last month, heard you talking about transformation and rebuilding. You've become someone extraordinary. I've become who I always was underneath. I just forgot for a while living in your world, trying to be who you needed instead of who I actually am. I never asked you to change who you were. You didn't have to ask. Your expectations were clear without words, and I accommodated them because I thought that's what love required. I was wrong about what love requires. What does love require? In your understanding now? Mariah's voice was gentle but firm. Mutual respect that doesn't need to be demanded or negotiated. Genuine seeing of the other person, not just what they provide you. Willingness to choose them consistently, especially when it's inconvenient or costly. Things we had briefly at the beginning and lost slowly without either of us fighting to keep them. Sebastian looked down at his hands, studying them like they belonged to a stranger. I've become someone I don't particularly like, the man who told his wife he was keeping his mistress and expected her to be fine with it. That person disgusts me now, but I can't undo being him. I can only try to become someone different going forward. That's all anyone can do. We don't get to erase our worst moments or pretend they didn't happen. We only get to decide whether they define us permanently or become lessons we actually learn from. Did I define your worst moments? Mariah smiled sadly, understanding the question beneath the question. No, my worst moments were the ones where I accepted less than I deserved, because I'd convinced myself your version of love was enough, that asking for more was being unreasonable or demanding. You participated in those moments, but I allowed them. That's on both of us. They finished their coffee in heavy silence, both recognizing that nothing would be resolved or restored here. This conversation was autopsy, not resuscitation, examining what died and understanding why, but not bringing it back to life. I should get going. Mariah checked her phone. I'm meeting my editor in the morning to discuss the next book. You're writing another one? Fiction this time. Stories about women rebuilding their lives, using everything I learned but transforming it into something new. I'll read it when it comes out. I've read everything you've published. Mariah looked surprised. Everything? Everything. Your essays, your memoir, every interview transcript I could find. Trying to understand who you became after me. Trying to see myself through your eyes. And what did you see? Someone who had everything and valued nothing. Someone who mistook control for love and possession for partnership. Someone who destroyed the best thing in his life because he thought he deserved more than he'd earned. Mariah nodded slowly. That's accurate. Painful, but accurate. They stood, preparing to leave, and Sebastian felt the finality of this moment settling over him like snow. Can I ask you one more thing? You can ask. Did you ever love me? Really love me? Or was I always just a mistake you hadn't recognized yet? Mariah considered carefully, wanting to be honest. I loved the version of you that existed before success made you cruel. I loved the man who proposed in the botanical garden and said my words were magic. But that man disappeared gradually, and I don't know if he ever really existed, or if I just wanted him to so desperately that I imagined him into being. Sebastian felt tears rising but didn't bother hiding them anymore. If I had been different, if I'd appreciated you, prioritized you, never strayed, could we have made it? Maybe. But you weren't different. You were exactly who you were, and I accommodated that until I couldn't anymore. We can't build futures on hypothetical versions of people who never existed. They walked to the door together, and on the sidewalk outside, Sebastian stopped her with a hand that didn't quite touch her arm. Thank you for talking with me, for not just shutting me down completely when you had every right to. I didn't do it for you. I did it for myself. Closure matters even when it's painful to obtain. Mariah met his eyes directly. I hope you find what you're looking for, Sebastian. I genuinely mean that. Just understand that what you're looking for isn't me, and it never will be again. I know. Goodbye, Mariah. Goodbye, Sebastian. Go well. Become better. Find peace. She walked away, and Sebastian stood on the sidewalk watching her disappear into the Manhattan night. She turned left toward the subway, toward her life that didn't include him. He turned right toward his empty penthouse, toward consequences he'd be living with for the rest of his life. Some endings are just endings, clean and final and necessary for both people to actually move forward. And sometimes that's exactly what everyone needs, even if accepting it feels like another small death. 6 months later, Mariah's life had transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined during those early terrified days in Lucia's guest room. Her second book, a novel about women rebuilding their lives, debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. The screenplay adaptation of her memoir was in production with an A-list actress attached to play her. She'd been offered a teaching position at Columbia University in their creative writing program. Working with students who reminded her of who she'd been before marriage reshaped her. She'd started a foundation called Aftermath Resolution Fund, providing financial support and resources for women leaving abusive situations. The foundation had helped over 200 women in its first 6 months, giving them the money and support Mariah wished she'd had when she walked away with $1,247 in terror. Her workshops had expanded to 3 times weekly, always full, always transformational. Women continued finding their voices, publishing their stories, leaving situations that were slowly destroying them. And she'd started dating. Carefully, slowly, with boundaries she enforced without apology. His name was Marcus Chen, an architect she'd met at a coffee shop where she wrote every morning. He'd approached her after watching her work for 3 weeks, gathering courage. I don't usually do this, but I've seen you here every morning for weeks, and I can't stop wondering what you're writing that makes you smile and cry sometimes in the same paragraph. Mariah had looked up, assessing him quickly. Stories about survival, about women remembering their worth. I'd love to read them sometime. If you're willing to share. They'd talked for 2 hours that first morning. Then, every morning after, Marcus was kind without being weak, successful without being arrogant, attracted to her ambition rather than intimidated by it. I love that you're driven, he told her on their 3rd date. Don't ever dim that for me or anyone else. I won't. And if I catch myself doing it, call me out. Deal. And you do the same for me. It was healthy, equal, honest in ways her marriage to Sebastian had never been. Mariah didn't know if it would last, but she knew she'd never again make herself smaller for someone else's comfort. Her apartment had upgraded to a 1-bedroom in Park Slope, still modest by Sebastian's standards, but perfect by every measure that actually mattered. She'd furnished it entirely with her own money, her own choices, creating a space that felt like home because it was completely hers. On a Saturday morning in May, Mariah sat at her desk working on her third book when her phone rang. A number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. Mariah Castellano? Yes? This is Amanda from the Sundance Film Festival. I'm calling with extraordinary news. The film adaptation of Aftermath Resolution has been accepted into our festival competition. We'd love for you to attend the premiere in January. Mariah sat down abruptly, her legs no longer supporting her weight. The screenplay based on her life, on her survival, was going to Sundance. I'd be honored to attend. When she hung up, she sat in stunned silence, trying to process how far she'd come. From a woman who'd believed she was nothing without her husband's money to someone whose story was reaching millions, helping people, changing lives. She called Lucia immediately. Baby girl, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. The film got into Sundance. Lucia screamed, actual screaming that made Mariah pull the phone away from her ear. I'm so proud of you I could burst. You did this. You built all of this from $1,200 and determination. I couldn't have done it without you. Without you giving me a place to stay when I had nothing. You would have found a way. That's who you are. You're a survivor who became a thriver, who became someone who helps other people do the same. That night, Mariah allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she'd accomplished. She'd walked away from everything society told her she needed. Security, wealth, status, the protection of a powerful man's name, and she'd discovered she'd never needed any of it. She just needed permission to stop performing someone else's version of her life and start living her own. Across the city, Sebastian Hunt sat in his smaller apartment, the penthouse sold months ago when maintaining. It became financially and emotionally unsustainable, and saw the Sundance announcement on social media. He stared at the post showing Mariah radiant and successful, and felt something that might have been pride mixed with profound regret. In therapy the next day, Dr. Morrison asked her usual probing questions. I saw your ex-wife's film got into Sundance. How are you feeling about that? Proud of her. Devastated for myself. Understanding with absolute clarity what I destroyed and can never get back. That's honest. More honest than you've been willing to be before. I watch her succeed at everything I told her she couldn't do, and I understand that I didn't just lose a wife. I lost someone who could have been my actual partner if I'd been capable of seeing her as a whole person instead of an extension of my life. Are you still hoping for reconciliation? Sebastian shook his head. No, not anymore. I'm just trying to become someone who wouldn't make those mistakes again. Someone who could actually value what matters instead of destroying it through arrogance and entitlement. That's the work. That's all you can do. Sebastian nodded, accepting that his future would never include Mariah, but might include becoming someone worthy of someone else's trust if he kept doing the hard work of transformation. He'd lost his company, regained partial involvement as consultant but never full control again. He'd lost his family's complete trust, though his mother had recently started returning his calls. He'd lost his social standing, though a few genuine friendships had survived the devastation. He lived more modestly now, still comfortable by most standards, but without the excess that had once defined his life. He'd learned that enough was actually sufficient when you stopped needing luxury to feel valuable. It wasn't redemption, just responsibility. Living with consequences and trying to become better even though better didn't erase what he'd done. Both Mariah and Sebastian would wake up tomorrow and continue living the lives they'd chosen. Only one of them would wake up happy, free, and finally whole. So what's the moral of Mariah and Sebastian's story? Is it that all marriages end badly? That wealthy people are cruel? That revenge is sweet? No, the moral is much simpler and much more profound than any of those easy answers. The moral is this: your worth exists independent of anyone else's recognition of it. Mariah didn't become valuable when her book succeeded. She was always valuable. She just forgot temporarily when someone convinced her that her value came from serving his needs. Comfort can become a cage. Mariah had everything money could buy. She had nothing that mattered. No agency, no voice, no self. Financial security that costs your soul isn't security. It's just expensive imprisonment. Walking away is not failure. Society says stay, compromise, make it work at any cost. But wisdom says some situations only improve through exit. Leaving took more strength than staying ever did. Starting over proved Mariah's capacity, not her weakness. You can't negotiate yourself into someone's love. Mariah accommodated herself into invisibility. Sebastian never appreciated her sacrifice. He expected it. Love doesn't require one person to disappear. Partnership means both people remain whole. And finally, success is the best response to people who underestimate you. Not revenge, not spite, just living well. Mariah didn't destroy Sebastian out of vengeance. She built herself up. His collapse was his own doing. Her success wasn't about him. It was despite him. So here's my question for you listening right now. Who are you making yourself smaller for? What are you tolerating that's slowly killing who you actually are? What would you do if you weren't afraid of starting over? Who would you become if you chose yourself as fiercely as you choose others? Think about those questions. Sit with them. Let them make you uncomfortable, because discomfort is often the first sign that change is necessary. Mariah's story isn't special because she's extraordinary. It's special because she's not. She's every woman who's ever been told she's nothing without someone else. Every person who's ever accommodated themselves into invisibility. Every human who's ever forgotten their worth because someone powerful convinced them they had none. She's you. She's me. She's everyone who's ever had to choose between comfort and self. And she chose self. That choice changed everything. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own strength, if it gave you permission to choose yourself, I need you to do something for me right now. Hit that like button. Smash it. Subscribe to Mr. Hearthline Stories, because every single week we bring you narratives about real people facing impossible challenges and discovering they're stronger than they ever imagined. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Your story matters. Your voice matters. You matter. See you next time.